The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsay. Part 13. Chapter 26. The Horn of Alveric. Northward to lonely lands, through wearying years, Alveric wandered, where windy fragments of his grey gaunt tent added a gloom to chill evenings, and the folk upon lonely farms, as they lit their lights in their houses and the ricks began to darken against the pale green of the sky, would sometimes hear the rap of the mallets of Niv and Zend coming clear through the hush from the land that no others trod, and their children, peering from casements to see if a star was come, would see perhaps the queer grey shape of a tent, of that tent, flapping its tatters about the last of the hedgerows, where a moment before was only the grey of the gloaming. On the next morning there would be guesses and wonderings, and the joy and fear of the children, and the tales that their elders told them, and the explorations by stealth to the edges of the fields of men, shy peerings through dim green gaps in the last of the hedgerows, though to look towards the east was forbidden, and rumours and expectations and all these things were blended together by this wonder that came from the east, and so passed into legend, which lived for many a year beyond that morning, but Alveric and his tent would be gone. So, day by day and season after season, that company wandered on, the lonely mateless man, the moonstruck lad and the madman, and that old grey tent with its long twisted pole. And all the stars became known to them, and all the four winds familiar, and rain and mist and hail. But the flow of yellow windows, all warm and welcome at night, they knew only to say farewell to. With the earliest light and the first chill of dawn, Alveric would awake from impatient dreams, and Niv would arise shouting, and always they would go upon their crazed crusade before any sign of awaking appeared on the dim, quiet gables. And every morning Niv prophesied that they would surely find Elfland, and the days wore away, and the years. Phil had long left them, Phil who prophesied victory to them in burning song, whose inspirations cheered Alveric on coldest nights and led him through the rockiest ways. Phil sang one evening suddenly songs of some young girl's hair, Phil who should have led their wanderings, and then one day in the gloaming, a blackbird singing, the May in bloom for miles, he turned for the houses of men, and married the maiden, and was one no more with any band of wanderers. The horses were dead. Niv and Zend carried all they had on the pole. Many years had gone. One autumn morning Alveric left the camp to go to the houses of men. Niv and Zend eyed each other. Why should Alveric seek to ask the way of others? For somehow or other their mad minds knew his purpose more swiftly than sane institutions. Had he not Niv's prophecies to guide him, and the things that Zend had been told on earth by the full moon? Alveric came to the houses of men, and of the folk he questioned few would speak of all things that lay to the east, and if he spoke of the lands through which he had wandered for years, they gave as little heed as if he were telling them that he had pitched his tent on the coloured layers of air that glowed and drifted and darkened in the low sky over the sunset. And the few that answered him said only one thing, that only the wizard knew. When he had learned this, Alveric went back from the fields and the hedgerows and came again to his old grey tent in the lands of which none thought. And Niv and Zend sat there silent, eyeing him sideways, for they knew he mistrusted madness and things said by the moon. And the next day, when they moved their camp in the chill of dawn, Niv led the way without shouting. They had not gone for many more weeks upon their curious journey when Alveric met one morning at the edge of the fields men tended, one filling his bucket at a well, whose thin, high, conical hat and mystical air proclaimed him as surely a wizard. "Master," said Elfric, "of those arts men dread, I have a question that I would ask of the future." And the wizard turned from his bucket to look at Elfric with doubtful eyes, for the traveller's tattered figure seemed scarce to promise such fees as are given by those that justly question the future. And, such as those fees are, the wizard named them. And Elfric's wallet held that which banished the doubts of the wizard, so that he pointed to where the tip of his tower peered over a cluster of myrtles, and prayed Elfric to come to his door, when the evening star should appear, and in that propitious hour he would make a future clear to him. And again, Niv and Zen knew well that their leader followed after dreams and mysteries that came not from madness nor from the moon, and he left them sitting still and saying nothing, but with minds full of fierce visions. Through pale air, waiting for the evening star, Elfric walked over the fields men tended and came to the dark oak door of the wizard's tower, which myrtles brushed against with every breeze. A young apprentice in wizardry opened the door, and by ancient wooden steps that the rats knew better than men, led Elfric to the wizard's upper room. The wizard had on a silken cloak of black, which he held to be due to the future. Without it he would not question the years to be. And then, when the young apprentice had gone away, he moved to a volume he had on a high desk and turned from the volume to Elfric to ask what he sought of the future. And Elfric asked him how he should come to Elfland. Then the wizard opened the great book's darkened cover and turned the pages therein, and for a long while all the pages he turned were blank. But further on in the book, much writing appeared, although of no kind that Elfric had ever seen. And the wizard explained that such books as those told of all things, but that he, being only concerned with the years to be, had no need to read all of the past, and had therefore acquired a book that told of the future only, though he might have had more than his from the college of wizardry, had he cared to study the follies already committed by man. Then he read for a while in his book, and Elfric heard the rats returning softly to the streets and the houses that they had made in the stairs. And then the wizard found what he sought of the future, and told Elfric that it was written in his book how he should never come to Elfland while he carried a magical sword. When Elfric heard this, he paid the wizard's fees and went away doleful, for he knew the perils of Elfland, which no common sabre forged on the anvils of men could ever avail to parry. He did not know that the magic that was in his sword left a flavour or taste on the air like that of lightning, which passes through the border of twilight and spread over Elfland. Nor knew that the Elf King learned of his presence thus and drew his frontier away from him, so that Elfric should trouble his realm no more. But he believed what the wizard had read to him out of the book, and so went doleful away. And leaving the stairs of oak to time and the rats, he passed out of the grove of myrtles and over the fields of men, and came again to that melancholy spot where his grey tent brooded mournfully in the wilderness, dull and silent as Niv and Zend sitting beside it. And after that they turned and wandered southward, for all the journeys now seemed equally hopeless to Elfric, who would not give up his sword to meet magical perils without magical aid, and Niv and Zend obeyed him silently, no longer guiding him with raving prophecies or with things said by the moon, for they knew he had taken counsel with another. By weary ways, with lonely wanderings, they came far to the south, and never the border of Elfland appeared, with its heavy layers of twilight. Yet Elfric would never give up his sword, for well he guessed that Elfland dreaded its magic, and had poor hope of recapturing Lirazel with any blade that was dreadful only to men. And after a while Niv prophesied again, and the Zen would come late on nights of the full moon to wake Elfric with his tales, And for all the mystery that was in Zend when he spoke, and for all the exaltation of Niv when he prophesied, Alveric knew by now that the tales and the prophecies were empty and vain, and that neither of these would ever bring him to Elfland. With this mournful knowledge, in a desolate land, he still struck camp at dawn, still marched, still sought for the frontier, and so the months went by. And one day, where the edge of earth was a wild, untended heath, running down to the rocky waste in which Alveric had camped, he saw at evening a woman in the hat and cloak of a witch sweeping the heath with a broom. And each stroke as she swept the heath was away from the fields we know, away to the rocky waste, eastward towards Elfland. Big gusts of black, dried earth and puffs of sand were blowing towards Alveric from every powerful stroke. He walked towards her from his sorry encampment and stood near and watched her sweeping. But still she laboured at her vigorous work, striding away behind dust from the fields we know and sweeping as she strode. And after a while she lifted her face as she swept and looked at Alveric, and he saw that it was the witch Zero-Onderel. After all these years he saw the witch again, and she saw beneath the flapping rags of his coat that sword that she had made for him once upon her heel. Its scabbard of leather could not hide from the witch that it was that very sword, for she knew the flavour of magic that rose from it faintly and floated wide through the evening. "Mother Witch," said Alveric, and she curtsied low to him, magical though she was and aged by the passing of years that had been before Alveric's father. And though many an earl had forgotten their lord by now, she yet had not forgotten. He asked her what she was doing there on the heath with her broom in the evening. "Sweeping the world," she said, and Alveric wondered what rejected things she was sweeping away from the world, with grey dust mournfully turning over and over as it drifted across the fields, going slowly into the darkness that was gathering beyond our coasts. "Why are you sweeping the world, Mother Witch?" he said. "There's things in the world that ought not to be here," said she. He looked wistfully then at the rolling grey clouds from her broom that were all drifting towards Elfland. "Mother Witch," he said, "can I go too? I have looked for 12 years for Elfland, and I have not found a glimpse of the elfin mountains." And the old witch looked kindly at him, and then she glanced at his sword. "He's afraid of my magic," she said, and thought or mystery dawned in her eyes as she spoke. "Who?" said Alveric, and Zero-Onderel lowered her eyes. "The king," she said. And then she told him how that enchanted monarch would draw away from whatever had worsted him once, and with him draw all that he had, never supporting the presence of any magic that was the equal of his. And Alveric could not believe that such a king cared so much for the magic he had in his old black scabbard. "It is his way," she said, and then he would not believe that he had waved away Elfland. "He has the power," said she, and still Alveric would face this terrible king and all the powers he had, but wizard and witch had warned him that he could go not with his sword, and how go unarmed through the grisly woods against the Palace of Wonder, for to go there with any sword from the anvils of men but was to go unarmed. "Mother Witch," he cried, "may I come no more to Elfland?" And the longing and the grief in his voice touched the witch's heart and moved it to a magical pity. "You shall go," she said. He stood there, half despair, in the mournful evening, half dreams of Lirazel, while the witch from under her cloak drew forth a small false weight, which once she had taken away from a cellar of bread. "Draw this along the edge of your sword," she said, all the way from hilt to point, and it will disenchant the blade, and the king will never know the sword is there. Will it still fight for me? Said Elfric. No, said the witch, but once you are over the frontier, take this script and wipe the blade with it on every spot that the false weight has touched. And she fumbled under her cloak again and drew forth a poem on parchment. It will enchant it again, she said, and Elfric took the weight and the written thing. Let not the two touch, warned the witch, and Elfric set them apart. Once over the frontier, she said, and he may move Elfland where he will, but you and the sword will be within its borders. Mother witch, said Elfric, will he be wroth with you if I do this? Wroth, said Zero Onderel, wroth. He will rage with a most exceeding fury beyond the power of tigers. I would not bring that on you, Mother Witch, said Elfric. Ha, said Zero Onderel. What care I? Night was advancing now, and the moor and the air growing black like the witch's cloak. She was laughing now and merging into the darkness, and soon the night was all blackness and laughter, but he could see no witch. Then Elfric made his way back to his rocky camp by the light of its lonely fire, and as soon as morning appeared on the desolation and all the useless rocks began to glow, he took the false weight and softly rubbed it along both sides of his sword until all its magical edge was disenchanted. And he did this in his tent while his followers slept, for he would not let them know that he sought for help that came not from the ravings of Niv, nor from any sayings that Zend had had from the moon. Yet the troubled sleep of madness is not so deep that Niv did not watch him out of one wild, sly eye when he heard the false weight softly rasping the sword. And when this was secretly done and secretly watched, Elfric called to his two men, and they came and folded up his tattered tent and took the long pole and hung their sorry belongings upon it. And on went Elfric along the edge of the fields we know, impatient to come at last to the lands that so long eluded him. And Niv and Zend came behind with the pole between them, with bundles swinging from it and tatters flying. They moved inland a little towards the house of men to purchase the food they needed, and then this they bought in the afternoon from a farmer who dwelt in a lonely house so near to the very edge of the fields we know that it must have been the last house in the visible world. And here they bought bread and oatmeal and cheese and a cured ham and other such things, and put them in sacks and slung them over their pole. Then they left the farmer and turned away from the fields and from all the fields of men. And as evening fell, they saw just over a hedge, lighting up the land with a soft, strange glow that they knew to be not of this earth, that barrier of twilight that is the frontier of Elfland. "Lirazel!" shouted Elfric, and drew his sword and strode into the twilight. And behind him went Niv and Zend, with all their suspicions flaming now into jealousy of inspirations or magic that were not theirs. Once he called Lirazel, then, little trusting his voice in that wide, weird land, he lifted his hunter's horn that hung by his side on a strap. He lifted it to his lips and sounded a call, weary and with so much wondering. He was standing within the edge of the boundary. The horn shone in the light of Elfland. Then Niv and Zend dropped their pole in that unearthly twilight where it lay like the wreckage of some uncharted sea, and suddenly seized their master. "A land of dreams," said Niv. "Have I not dreams enough?" "There is no moon there," cried Zend. Elfric struck Zend on the shoulder with his sword, but the sword was disenchanted and blunt and only harmed him slightly. Then the two seized the sword and dragged Elfric back. and the strength of the madmen was beyond what one could believe. They dragged him back again into the fields we know, where they were too strange and jealous of other strangeness, and led him far from the sight of the pale blue mountains. He had not entered Elfland, but his horn had passed the boundary's edge and troubled the air of Elfland, uttering across its dreamy calm one long, sad, earthly note. It was the horn that Lirazel heard as she spoke with her father. Chapter 27. The Return of Luraloo. Over hamlet and castle of Earl, and through every nook and crevice of it, spring passed, a mild benediction that blessed the very air and sought out all living things, not missing even the tiny plants that had their dwelling in the most secluded places, under eaves, in the cracks of old barrels, or along the lines of mortar that held ancient rows of stones. And in this season Orion hunted no unicorns. Not that he knew in what season the unicorns bred in Elfland, where time is not as here, but because of a feeling he had had from all his earthly forefathers against hunting any creature in this season of song and flowers. So he tended his hounds and often watched the hills, expecting on any day the return of Luraloo. And spring passed by and the summer flowers grew, and still there was no sign of the troll returning, for time moves through the dells of Elfland as over no field of man. And long Orion watched through faded evenings till the lines of the hills were black, yet never saw the small round heads of trolls bobbing across the downs. And the long autumnal winds came sighing out of cold lands and found Orion still watching for Luraloo, and the mist and the turning leaves spoke to his heart of hunting. And the hounds were whining for the open spaces and the line of scent like a mysterious path crossing the wide world, but Orion would hunt nothing less than unicorns and waited yet for his trolls. And one of these earthly days, with a menace of frost in the air and scarlet sunset, Luraloo's talk to the trolls in the wood being finished, and their scamper swifter than hares, having brought them soon to the frontier, those in our fields who looked, as they seldom did, towards the mysterious border where earth ended, might have seen the unwonted shapes of the nimble trolls coming all grey through the evening. They came dropping, troll after troll, from the soaring leaps they took, high through the boundary of twilight, and landing thus unceremoniously in our fields, came capering, somersaulting, and running, with gusts of impudent laughter, as though this were a proper manner in which to approach by no means the least of the planets. They rustled by the small houses like wind passing through straw, and none that heard the light rushing sound of their passing knew how outlandish they were, except the dogs, whose work it is to watch and to know of all things that pass, their degree of remoteness to man. At gypsies, tramps, and all other go-without houses, dogs bark wherever they pass. At the wild things of the woods they bark with greater abhorrence. Knowing well the rebellious contempt in which they hold man, at the fox for his touch of mystery and his far wanderings, they bark more furiously. But tonight the barking of dogs was beyond all abhorrence and fury. Many a farmer this night believed that his dog was choking. And passing over these fields, staying not to laugh at the clumsy, scared running of sheep, for they kept their laughter for men, they came soon to the downs above Earl. And there below them was night, the smoke of men, all grey together. And not knowing from what slight cause the smoke arose, here from a woman boiling a kettle of water, or there because one dried the frock of a child, or that a few old men might warm their hands in the evening, the trolls forbore to laugh as they had planned to do as soon as they should meet with the things of man. Perhaps even they, whose gravest thoughts were just under the surface of laughter, even they were a little awed by the strangeness and nearness of man sleeping there in his hamlet, with all his smoke about him, though awe in these light minds rested no longer than does the squirrel on the thin extremest twigs. In a while they lifted their eyes up from the valley, and there was the western sky still shining above the last of the gloaming, a little strip of colour and dying light, so lovely that they believed that another Elfland lay to the side of the valley, two dim, diaphanous, magical elfin lands hemming in this valley, and few fields of men close upon either side. And sitting there on the hillside, peering westward, the next thing they saw was a star. It was Venus, low in the west, brimming with blueness. And they all bowed their heads many times to this pale, blue, beautiful stranger. For, though politeness was rare with them, they saw that the evening star was nothing of earth and no affairs of man, and believed it came out of the Elfland. They did not know in the western side of the world. And more stars appeared, till the trolls were frightened, for they knew nothing of these glittering wanderers that could steal out of the darkness and shine. At first they said, "There are more trolls than stars," and were comforted, for they trusted greatly in numbers. Then there were soon more stars than trolls, and the trolls were ill at ease as they sat in the dark underneath all that multitude. But presently they forgot the fancy that troubled them, for no thought remained with them long. They turned their light attention instead to the yellow lights that glowed here and there on the hither side of the greyness, where a few of the houses of men stood warm and snug near the trolls. A beetle went by, and they hushed their chatter to hear what it would say, but he droned by, going home, and they did not know his language. A dog far off was ceaselessly crying out and filling all the still night with a note of warning, and the trolls were angry at the sound of his voice, for they felt he had interfered between them and man. Then a soft whiteness came out of the night and lit on the branch of a tree, and bowed its head to the left and looked at the trolls, and then bowed over to the right and looked at them again, from there and then back to the left again, for it was not yet sure about them. "An owl," said Luraloo. And many besides Luraloo had seen his kind before, for he flies much along the edge of Elfland. Soon he was gone, and they heard him haunting across the hills and hollows, and then no sound was left but the voices of men or the shrill shouts of children, and the bay of the dog that warned men against the trolls. "A sensible fellow," they said of the owl, for they liked the sound of his voice, but the voices of men and their dogs sounded confused and tiresome. They saw something of the lights of late wayfarers crossing the downs towards Earl, or heard men that cheered themselves in the lonely night by singing instead of by lanterns' light. And all the while the evening star grew bigger and the trees grew blacker and blacker. Then, from underneath the smoke and the mist of the stream, there boomed all of a sudden the brazen bell of the Freer out of the deep night in the valley. Night and the slopes of Earl and the dark downs echoed with it, and the echoes rode up to the trolls and seemed to challenge them with all the accursed things and wandering spirits and bodies unblessed of the Freer. And the solemn sound of those echoes going along through the night from every heavy swing of the holy bell cheered that band of trolls among all the strangeness of earth, for whatever is solemn always moves trolls to levity. They turned merrier now and tittered amongst themselves. And while they still watched all that host of stars, wondering if they were friendly, the sky grew steely blue, and the eastern stars dwindled, and the mist and the smoke of men turned white, and a radiance touched the further edge of the valley, and the moon came up over the downs behind the trolls. Then voices sang from the holy place of the Freer, chaunting moon maidens, which was their wont to sing on nights of the full moon, while the moon was yet low, and this rite they named Moon's Morning. The bell had ceased. Chance voices spoke no more. They had hushed their dog in the valley and silenced his warning. And lonely and grave and solemn that people's song floated up from before the candles in their small square sacred place, built of grey stones by men that were dead for ages and ages, All solemn the song welled up in the time of the moon's rising, grave as the night, mysterious as the full moon, and fraught with a meaning that was far beyond the highest thoughts of the trolls. Then the trolls leapt up with one accord from the frosted grass of the downs, and all poured down the valley to laugh at the ways of men, to mock their sacred things, and to dare their singing with levity. Many a rabbit rose up and fled from their onrush, and thrills of laughter arose from the trolls at their fear. A meteor flashed westward, racing after the sun, either as a portent to warn the hamlet of Earl that folk from beyond earth's borders was approaching them now, or else in fulfilment of some natural law. To the trolls it seemed that one of the proud stars fell, and they rejoiced with elvish levity. Thus they came giggling through the night and ran down the street of the village, unseen as any wild creature that roams late through the darkness, and Luraloo led them to the pigeon loft, and they all poured clambering in. Some rumour arose in the village that a fox had jumped into the pigeon loft, but it ceased almost as soon as the pigeons returned to their home, and the folk of Earl had no more hint till the morning that something had entered their village from beyond the borders of earth. In a brown mass thicker than young pigs are along the edge of a trough, the trolls encumbered the floor of the pigeons' home, and time went over them as over all earthly things, and well they knew, though tiny was their intelligence, that by crossing the border of twilight they incurred the wasting of time. For nothing dwells by the brink of any danger and lives ignorant of its menace. As conies in rocky altitudes know the peril of the sheer cliff, so that they dwell near earth's border knew well the danger of time, and yet they came. The wonder and the lure of earth had been overstrong for them. Does not many a young man squander youth as they squandered immortality? And Luraloo showed them how to hold off time for a while, which otherwise would make them older and older each moment, and whirl them on with earth's restlessness all night long. Then he curled up his knees and shut his eyes and lay still. This, he told them, was sleep, and cautioned them to continue to breathe, though, being still in other respects, he then slept in earnest, and after some vain attempts the brown trolls did the same. When the sunrise came, awaking all earthly things, long rays came through the 30 little windows and awoke both birds and trolls. And the mass of trolls went to the windows to look at earth, and the pigeons fluttered to the rafters and jerked sidelong looks at the trolls, and there that a heap of trolls would have stayed, crowded high on each other's shoulders, blocking the windows while they studied the variety and restlessness of earth, finding them equal to the strangest fables that wayfarers had brought to them out of our fields. And although Luraloo often reminded them they had forgotten the haughty white unicorns that they were to hunt with dogs, but Luraloo, after a while, led them down from the loft and brought them to the kennels, and they climbed up the high palings and peered over the tops at the hounds. When the hounds saw those strange heads peering over the palings, they made a great uproar, and presently folk came to see what troubled the hounds. And when they saw that a mass of trolls all around the top of the paling, they said to each other, and so said all that heard of it, "There is magic in Earl now." End of part 13. If you have been enjoying this audiobook, please take the time to subscribe. It would really help the station. If you could also like or leave a comment or share this station with other friends, that would be great. Thank you.